Hi, I'm Mickalene Thomas. I'm here at the Smithsonian American Art Museum. I guess my appeal to craft materials is also another historical reference to women making art. When I was in undergrad, I couldn't always afford oil paint. And so because I was in a school and still had to make work, I had to figure out ways in which to still make my art and not limit myself to, I can't make my art because I don't have oil paint or acrylic paint. So I gravitated toward non-traditional materials that were considered maybe for some a low art, but also to others a high art if you look at outsider artists, right? And so I began going to Michael's craft stores because I could afford felt, and I can afford yarn, and I can afford these little bags of rhinestones or glitter, and you know, I could get like an abundance of those versus to a tube of paint. And so I began to acquire these materials and find meanings and ways to use them in my own work as a way of identifying myself, but also making an image. That's something that I also push forward with some of my students, is not to limit yourself with what you can't do, but just try to think of what you can do and use those materials that are within your own environment to make something. When I was living in Portland, Oregon, I would go to this bookstore called Powell's Books. And within the stacks of their books, I would just go up and down the aisle, pulling out books on African-American artists. And I remember looking at a William H. Johnson monograph and thinking at that time, this is catalog raisonné, and thinking how his sensibility of his line, representation of his journeys and the people in his environment, and depicting his world and depicting African Americans' lifestyles was a direct representation of who I was. It's really important for me as an artist to have a representation of myself, so that, you know, youth could see themselves in these particular environments like museums. So when they see my work, that with all the art history, whether it's from William H. Johnson to, you know, someone like David Hockney or Matisse, that when they're standing here, that they see themselves.